The first time I heard my voice played back on international television, I wept. Not because I was nervous or overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, though I was both of those things. I wept because the voice coming through those speakers, reaching millions of homes across 6 continents, was unmistakably, unapologetically mine. The same voice they'd laughed at in that cramped Chicago newsroom 15 years ago. The same accent they'd told me to fix if I ever wanted to be taken seriously. The same cadence and rhythm that a producer once called too foreign for American ears. That voice was now welcoming viewers to the most-watched morning program in the world. Good morning, I'm Adiz Okonkwo, and this is Global Sunrise. I let those words settle into the silence of my dressing room, watching myself on the monitor, listening to myself speak to an audience larger than the entire population of the country where I was born. And somewhere in that moment, between the tears and the disbelief, I felt the presence of everyone who had ever told me I wasn't enough, and everyone who had insisted I was more than enough. Both had brought me here. Both had shaped me into the woman speaking through that screen. But the journey from there to here, from a small village in southeastern Nigeria to this glass tower in New York City, that journey was written in tears and triumph, in mockery and miracles. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Adiz Chidinma Okonkwo, and I was born in Umuahia, a city in Abia State, Nigeria, during the rainy season of 1985. My father, Chukwumeka Okonkwo, was a secondary school headmaster who believed that education was the bridge between poverty and possibility. My mother, Ngozi, sold fabric in the local market and raised 6 children with a combination of fierce love and fiercer discipline. We were not wealthy by any measure. Our home had 3 rooms for 8 people. Electricity was unreliable. Water came from a well we shared with 4 other families, but what we lacked in material comfort, we made up for in something my father called the wealth of the mind. Adiz, he would say, using the name that meant the king's daughter in Igbo, your voice is a gift from God. Use it to speak truth. Use it to tell stories. Use it to lift up those who cannot lift themselves. I took his words literally. From the time I could form sentences, I was performing, reciting poems at church gatherings, narrating school plays, inventing radio shows that I would broadcast to my siblings using an empty tin can as a microphone. My mother would shake her head and laugh. This one will talk her way around the world, she'd say. She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. I was the third of 6 children, sandwiched between 2 older brothers who would become engineers and 3 younger sisters who would scatter across the globe like seeds in the wind. But even among so many, I stood out. Not because I was the smartest or the most obedient, but because I was the loudest. The one who asked too many questions. The one who wouldn't accept, because I said so, as an answer. You have your grandmother's spirit, my father told me once, and I knew from his tone that this was both a compliment and a warning. My grandmother, Mama Nneka, had been a storyteller in her village, a woman who commanded attention simply by opening her mouth. She died before I was born, but her legacy lived in me. By the time I reached secondary school, I knew exactly what I wanted to be, a journalist. Not just any journalist, a broadcaster. I wanted to be the voice that people trusted, the face they turned to for news of the world beyond their villages and cities. Broadcasting, my mother asked skeptically when I shared my dream. On the radio, on television. On everything, Mama. I want the whole world to hear me. She exchanged a look with my father, the kind of look parents share when their child's ambition exceeds what they know is possible. Then you'll need to go to university, my father said finally, and you'll need to be better than everyone else, because the world doesn't make room for people like us easily. We have to carve our own space. I earned a scholarship to the University of Lagos, where I studied mass communication with a focus on broadcast journalism. Those 4 years were transformative, not just academically, but personally. I was exposed to students from across Nigeria and beyond, to professors who had worked in international media, to the intoxicating possibility that my dreams might actually be achievable. But I also encountered my first real experience of discrimination. not based on my ethnicity or my gender, though those would come later, but based on something I'd never considered a liability: my accent. "You sound too Igbo," a professor told me during a broadcasting practicum. "If you want to work in Lagos radio, you need to sound more neutral, more cosmopolitan." "More cosmopolitan," I repeated, not understanding. "Less village," he clarified, and something in his expression made clear that this was not a compliment. I went back to my dormitory that night and practiced speaking in front of a mirror. I tried to flatten my vowels, to swallow the musicality that came naturally to my tongue, to sound like the newscasters I heard on NTA and Channels television. It felt like wearing shoes that didn't fit. It felt like betraying something essential about myself. But I did it anyway, because I wanted the dream more than I wanted authenticity, or so I thought at the time. What I didn't realize was that this was just the beginning, that the accent I was trying to erase would follow me across oceans, becoming both my greatest obstacle and eventually, improbably, my greatest strength. After graduation, I worked for 3 years at a radio station in Lagos, a small operation that broadcast news, music, and community programming to a local audience. The pay was modest, the hours were long, and the equipment was held together with prayer and electrical tape. But I loved it. Every morning, I would sit behind that microphone and speak to thousands of listeners who depended on us for information, for entertainment, for connection. I reported on politics and community events. I interviewed market women and government officials. I learned to tell stories that mattered to people's lives. And slowly, carefully, I began to reclaim my voice. Not the flattened, cosmopolitan voice I'd practiced in university, but something closer to my authentic self. My producer noticed, but didn't complain. Our listeners seemed to respond to the warmth in my delivery, the musicality that I'd tried so hard to suppress. "You sound like someone's daughter," an elderly listener told me once, calling in after a broadcast. "Like someone who grew up hearing the same proverbs I did. Don't ever change that." I held onto those words like a talisman. But Lagos wasn't enough. The dream that had taken root in my childhood, the dream of speaking to the whole world, still burned in me, and I knew that to achieve it, I would have to leave Nigeria. The opportunity came in the form of a fellowship. A prestigious American journalism foundation was offering a 1-year program for international broadcasters, with the possibility of job placement upon completion. The application required an essay, a video audition, and 3 letters of recommendation. I worked on that application for 2 months. I rewrote the essay 17 times. I recorded the video audition over and over until I could recite it in my sleep. And I got in. I arrived in Chicago in January, stepping off the plane into a cold so brutal it took my breath away. I had never experienced winter, not real winter, the kind that freezes your eyelashes and makes your bones ache. I stood outside Hare Airport in a coat that was far too thin, waiting for the shuttle that would take me to my new life, and wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. The fellowship was based at a major network affiliate, where 20 international journalists from 15 countries would spend a year learning the American broadcast industry. We attended workshops on everything from camera presence to investigative techniques. We shadowed working journalists. We produced our own segments under the guidance of experienced mentors. It should have been the opportunity of a lifetime. In many ways, it was. But it was also my first real encounter with American racism, the particular kind that doesn't announce itself with slurs or violence, but with something more insidious. Assumptions, microaggressions, the slow, steady drip of being made to feel less than. And the primary weapon they used against me was my voice. "Adiz, can I talk to you for a minute?" It was 3 months into the fellowship. Sandra Mitchell, the executive producer who oversaw our program, had called me into her office. She was a polished woman in her 50s with blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Of course," I said, sitting in the chair across from her desk. "Your work has been impressive. Your research skills are excellent, your writing is strong, and you have a natural presence on camera." She paused, and I felt the but coming before she spoke it. But we need to talk about your delivery. My delivery. Your accent, she said it gently, as if she were delivering difficult news with kindness. It's quite pronounced. Some of our test viewers have had difficulty understanding you. I felt my face grow hot. I've been working on clarity and enunciation. It's not about clarity exactly, it's about familiarity. American audiences are accustomed to certain ways of speaking. When they hear an accent like yours, it can be distracting. It pulls focus from the content. An accent like mine, I repeated slowly. African accents can be challenging for viewers. It's not a judgment, it's just reality. If you want to succeed in American broadcasting, you'll need to work with a speech coach. We can help you minimize the accent, make your delivery more accessible. Accessible. The word hung in the air like an accusation. I see, I said quietly. And the British fellows, the Australian, do they need to minimize their accents as well? Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. That's a different situation. Those accents are more familiar to American audiences. They don't create the same barrier. I understood then what she wasn't saying. It wasn't about comprehension. It was about comfort. American audiences were comfortable with white accents, with European accents, with anything that didn't remind them of the parts of the world they'd rather not think about. My accent wasn't difficult to understand. It was difficult to accept. I left Sandra's office and walked straight to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall before the tears came. I called my mother that night, the time difference meaning it was early morning in Nigeria. Mama, they want me to change my voice. Change it how? They say I sound too African, that American people can't understand me. There was a long pause. When my mother spoke again, her voice was hard with an anger I rarely heard from her. Let me tell you something, Adiz. Your voice is the voice of your father and your grandmother and every ancestor who spoke before you. It carries our history, our prayers, our stories. Anyone who tells you to erase that voice is telling you to erase yourself. But Mama, if I don't change, I won't succeed here. Then succeed somewhere else, or succeed despite them. But do not, cut out your own tongue to make them comfortable. She paused. Your grandmother used to say, the chicken that tries to crow like a rooster will only confuse everyone and satisfy no one. I laughed despite my tears. What does that even mean? It means be who you are, my daughter. The right people will understand you perfectly. I hung up the phone feeling both comforted and terrified. My mother's words were beautiful, but they didn't pay bills or build careers. They didn't explain how I was supposed to achieve my dreams in a country that wanted me to become someone else. I spent the rest of the fellowship in a state of quiet rebellion. I worked with the speech coach, but I didn't erase my accent. I just learned to slow down, to enunciate more carefully, to give American ears time to adjust. Some of my supervisors appreciated the effort. Others made clear they thought I wasn't trying hard enough. When the fellowship ended, I wasn't offered a position at the network. Most of my white European colleagues were. I stayed in America anyway, because going home would mean admitting defeat, and Okonkwo women didn't admit defeat. The months after the fellowship were the loneliest of my life. I had a work visa that allowed me to stay in America, but finding a job proved nearly impossible. I sent out hundreds of applications to network affiliates, to cable news channels, to local stations in cities I'd never heard of. I tailored each resume, each cover letter, each demo reel to the specific requirements of each position. Most never responded. The few that did invited me for interviews, only to pass on my application after hearing me speak. The feedback, when it came at all, was always some variation of the same theme. Not the right fit. Looking for a different sound. Doesn't align with our audience demographics. I worked odd jobs to survive. I tutored college students in writing. I transcribed audio files for a legal firm. I even did voiceover work for a company that produced educational videos. Ironic, given that my voice was apparently too challenging for news broadcasts. My savings dwindled. My visa clock ticked. and the dream that had brought me across an ocean began to feel like a cruel joke. The breakthrough, when it came, arrived from an unexpected direction. I was working part-time at a small nonprofit that served African immigrant communities in Chicago, helping with communications, writing newsletters, occasionally appearing on their modest cable access show to discuss issues affecting the diaspora. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I left Lagos, but it was something. One evening, after tapping a segment about immigration policy, a woman approached me in the hallway. "You're Adiz Okonkwo, right? The broadcaster from Nigeria." She was African American, maybe 50 years old, with silver locks and an intensity in her gaze that made me straighten my posture. Do I know you?" "Not yet, I'm Patricia Washington. I run a media training program for journalists of color. I've been watching your work on this show." She tilted her head, studying me. "You're good, really good. Why are you here instead of at a real network?" I laughed bitterly before I could stop myself, because apparently my accent is too African for American television. Patricia didn't laugh. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She just nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew. "Come to my office tomorrow. I want to show you something." Patricia's office was in a converted warehouse in the South Side, filled with editing equipment, stacks of newspapers, and photographs of Black journalists spanning decades. She poured me tea and sat across from me, her expression serious. "Let me tell you a story," she began. 40 years ago, I was one of the first Black women to anchor a local news broadcast in this city. Do you know what they told me? That my hair was too ethnic, that my features were too strong, that I needed to straighten my hair and soften my delivery if I wanted white viewers to trust me. Did you soften? For a while, I did everything they asked. I became a version of myself that was palatable to people who didn't want to see me at all. She shook her head. And it nearly killed me. I was successful by their standards, but I was dying inside. I'd erased so much of myself that I didn't know who I was anymore. What changed? I realized something important. The problem was never my hair or my features or my voice. The problem was their discomfort with difference. And no amount of accommodation would fix that, because the goalpost would always move. The moment I changed one thing, they'd find another thing that needed changing. I felt tears prick at my eyes. "So what did you do?" I stopped trying to fix myself and started trying to fix the system. I couldn't do it alone, so I found allies. I mentored young journalists who looked like me, who sounded like me, who came from places the industry didn't value. I built a network. She leaned forward. "And now I'm offering you a place in that network." Patricia's program was unlike anything I'd experienced. It wasn't about erasing our identities. It was about weaponizing them. She connected me with other journalists of color who'd faced similar barriers. A Mexican-American reporter whose Spanish accent had been deemed too ethnic. A Korean-American anchor told she needed to anglicize her name. A Black British correspondent whose Caribbean inflections were considered confusing. Together, we formed a community of the rejected, the overlooked, the told to change. But more than that, Patricia taught us strategy. "The mainstream networks aren't the only game in town," she said during one of our sessions. "The media landscape is changing. Digital platforms, international outlets, niche markets, there are audiences hungry for voices they've never heard. Your job is to find them." She helped me build a web presence, creating content that showcased my unique perspective as an African journalist in America. I started a podcast called Between Two Worlds, exploring stories that fell between the cracks of traditional news coverage. I wrote op-eds for online publications about the immigrant experience, about the African diaspora, about the hidden biases in American media. Slowly, an audience found me. Not the massive audiences I dreamed of as a girl in Umuahia, but real people who connected with my voice precisely because it was different. They were immigrants who heard their own families in my cadence. They were Americans curious about perspectives their local news didn't provide. They were Africans scattered across the globe who were hungry to see themselves reflected in media. "You're building something important," Patricia told me, after one of my podcast episodes went unexpectedly viral, an interview with a Nigerian-American doctor about health disparities in immigrant communities. You're proving that there's an audience for authentic voices. Now you just need to make sure the right people notice. The right person noticed 6 months later. I received an email from a producer at Al Jazeera English, the international news network headquartered in Qatar, with bureaus around the world. They were launching a new program focused on African affairs and wanted to interview me for a correspondent position based in their Washington, D.C. bureau. I read the email 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. They found me through my podcast, I told Patricia, my voice trembling with disbelief. They said they've been following my work. They think my unique perspective and authentic voice would be an asset to their coverage. Patricia smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her usually serious face. And there it is, she said. The world is bigger than one network in one country. Sometimes you have to go around the wall instead of through it. I flew to Washington for the interview, wearing the nicest outfit I owned and carrying a portfolio of my best work. When the producer asked me to do a screen test, I spoke in my natural voice, musical, accented, unapologetically Nigerian. 2 weeks later, they offered me the job. Al Jazeera English changed everything. For the first time in my career, I was working for an organization that didn't see my accent as a problem to be fixed. They saw it as an asset, a marker of authenticity that connected their coverage to the regions they reported on. My beat was African affairs, which meant I covered everything from elections and economic development to conflict and humanitarian crises. I traveled to countries I'd only read about in textbooks: South Africa, Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Senegal. I interviewed presidents and refugees, entrepreneurs and activists, ordinary people living through extraordinary circumstances. And through it all, I spoke in my own voice. The first time I filed a report from the field, a piece about voter registration challenges in rural Zimbabwe, I watched the finished segment with tears in my eyes. There I was, standing in front of a village polling station, speaking to a global audience of millions, sounding exactly like myself. "You look good," my camera operator said, misunderstanding my emotion. "Very professional." "It's not that," I managed. "It's just, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life." The years at Al Jazeera were formative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I learned to report from conflict zones, wearing body armor in South Sudan while bullets flew overhead. I learned to hold space for grief, sitting with mothers who'd lost children to famine and violence while maintaining the composure needed to tell their stories. I learned that journalism was not just about information. It was about bearing witness, about ensuring that suffering didn't happen in silence. My work earned recognition. I received nominations for international journalism awards. My pieces were cited in academic papers and policy discussions. Other African journalists reached out to say that seeing me on their screens gave them hope for their own careers. But perhaps more importantly, I found a community. Al Jazeera's newsroom was unlike anything I'd experienced in American media. Correspondents came from every corner of the world: India, Brazil, Egypt, Australia, the UK, Malaysia. We spoke with different accents, brought different perspectives, approached stories from different cultural frameworks. "This is what journalism should be," I told my mother during one of our weekly calls. "Voices from everywhere, telling stories that matter to everyone. And they appreciate you there, your real voice. They don't just appreciate it, Mama. They seek it out. They understand that an African correspondent covering Africa has insights that an outsider simply cannot have." She was quiet for a moment. "Your father would be so proud." My father had passed away 2 years into my time at Al Jazeera, a sudden heart attack that brought me rushing back to Nigeria for a funeral I couldn't quite believe was real. He'd seen enough of my success to know that his daughter had made it, that the voice he'd nurtured in our small home in Umuahia was now being heard around the world. "He knows, Mama," I said, my throat tight. "Wherever he is, he knows." By my 5th year at the network, I'd been promoted to senior correspondent and was regularly anchoring special coverage. My face was recognizable to viewers across Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and beyond. The girl who'd been told she was too African for American television was now a fixture of international news. But I hadn't forgotten America, and America, it seemed, hadn't forgotten me. The media landscape had shifted dramatically in the years since my fellowship. Streaming platforms had disrupted traditional broadcasting. Audiences were fragmenting, seeking out niche content that spoke to their specific interests and identities. And there was a growing hunger, particularly among younger viewers, for diverse voices, perspectives, and stories. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email. The subject line made my heart stop. Opportunity at Global News Network, senior anchor position. Global News Network, GNN, was one of the largest English-language news organizations in the world. Their flagship morning program, Global Sunrise, reached over 100 million viewers across 6 continents. It was the kind of platform I'd dreamed about as a child, the kind of reach that could amplify voices and change narratives on a global scale. The email was from their new president of news, a woman named Rachel Torres who'd made her name championing diverse voices in media. She'd seen my work at Al Jazeera. She'd followed my career trajectory, and she wanted to meet. "We're launching a new vision for Global Sunrise," she wrote. "A program that reflects the world as it truly is, diverse, interconnected, complex. We need anchors who can speak to that world authentically. Your name came up repeatedly in our conversations." I read the email several times, waiting for the catch, for the asterisk that said, "But of course, you'll need to modify your accent," for the qualifier that reduced this opportunity to another exercise in assimilation. It never came. I flew to New York for the meeting, checking into a hotel not far from GNN's gleaming headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. The building was a monument to modern media, glass and steel, screens everywhere, the constant hum of news being made and broadcast to every corner of the globe. Rachel Torres met me personally, walking me through the newsroom with evident pride. "We've spent decades doing news one way," she said. "White anchors, American accents, perspectives centered on Western priorities, and it worked for a while. But the world has changed, our audience has changed, and we need to change with them." "Some of your colleagues might disagree," I observed. "Some of them do, but they're not the future, you are." She stopped walking and turned to face me directly. "Adiz, I've watched every piece you've produced in the last 5 years. Your work is exceptional, your presence is commanding, and your voice," she smiled. "Your voice sounds like the world we live in. That's not a liability, it's exactly what we need." I've been told before that American audiences can't understand me. American audiences have been underestimated by American media for decades. They're more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. They're ready for someone like you, they just haven't been given the option. She extended her hand. "I want you to anchor Global Sunrise. I want you to be the voice that wakes up the world every morning. I want you to show everyone what inclusive journalism can look like." I took her hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. "I have one condition," I said. "Name it." "I won't change my accent, not a single syllable. If you want me, you get all of me. The Igbo girl from Umuahia, the Lagos broadcaster, the Al Jazeera correspondent. All of it." Rachel's smile widened. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The announcement of my hearing made headlines before I'd even started. African journalist tapped to anchor GNN's Global Sunrise. The news spread through industry publications, social media, and international press with a speed that caught me off guard. Some celebrated the move as a breakthrough for diversity in broadcast journalism. Others were less enthusiastic. I made the mistake of reading the comment sections. "Can't wait to watch the news with subtitles." "Another diversity hire. What happened to meritocracy?" "She sounds like she just got off the boat. Is this what news has come to?" "I'm sure she's very qualified to report on Africa, but anchor a global program for American viewers? This is ridiculous." Each comment was a small cut, I told myself they didn't matter, that these were anonymous voices, bitter people hiding behind screens, not representative of the audience I would actually be speaking to. But the cuts still bled. Michael, the partner I'd been with for 3 years, a Jamaican-American professor of journalism at Columbia, found me one evening staring at my phone, scrolling through the vitriol with morbid fascination. "Stop that," he said gently, taking the phone from my hands. "You're letting strangers who have never met you determine your worth. They're going to be my viewers. What if they're right? What if I fail? Then you'll fail spectacularly, on the biggest stage in the world, doing something no one who looks like you has ever done." He cupped my face in his hands. "But you're not going to fail. You've been preparing for this moment your entire life." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've heard you speak, Adiz. I've watched you command a room, command a camera, command attention simply by opening your mouth. Your voice isn't a weakness, it's a weapon, and you're about to show the whole world how to use it." My first day at GNN was a blur of orientation meetings, studio tour, and introductions to colleagues whose faces I recognized from years of watching their broadcasts. Some welcomed me warmly. Others were cordial but distant, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. One encounter stood out. Bradley Ashworth was the program's co-anchor, a silver-haired veteran of broadcast journalism who'd been with GNN for over 20 years. He had the kind of polished American voice that producers loved, the kind of reassuring presence that had defined news anchoring for generations. "So you're the new addition," he said, extending his hand with a smile that seemed slightly forced. "Welcome to the team." "Thank you. I've admired your work for years." "That's kind of you." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Between us, I hope you know what you're getting into. This is a demanding job. The audience has expectations. They're used to a certain standard." "I'm aware of the standards. I intend to exceed them." His eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sure you'll try, but anchoring Global Sunrise isn't like anything you've done before. This isn't Al Jazeera with its niche audience. This is mainstream global media. The whole world will be watching and judging." "I've been judged my whole career, Bradley. I'm still here." He studied me for a moment, something shifting in his expression. I couldn't tell if it was respect or resentment. "Well then," he said finally, "I look forward to working with you." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me with the distinct impression that not everyone at GNN was as enthusiastic about my arrival as Rachel Torres. The first broadcast was scheduled for a Monday morning in September, deliberately timed to coincide with the fall season premiere, when viewership traditionally peaked. Rachel had organized a press campaign to generate buzz, and the anticipation was building to a fever pitch. I spent the weekend before in a state of controlled panic. I reviewed the show rundown 100 times. I practiced my delivery in front of every mirror in my apartment. I barely slept, lying awake imagining every possible disaster, technical failures, on-air mistakes, live moments of humiliation that would confirm everything the critics predicted. On Sunday night, my mother called. "How are you feeling, my daughter?" "Terrified, Mama. What if I fail? What if they were right all along? What if my voice isn't meant for this?" "Listen to me, Adiz." Her voice carried the same fierce certainty I remembered from childhood. "Tomorrow morning, you are going to sit in that chair, look into that camera, and speak to the world. And when you open your mouth, I want you to remember something." "What?" "You are not speaking for yourself alone. You are speaking for every little girl in every village who has been told her voice doesn't matter. You are speaking for your grandmother, whose stories were never recorded. You are speaking for your father, who always knew you would do great things. You carry all of us with you." I felt tears streaming down my face. "That's a lot of pressure, Mama." "No, my daughter, that's a lot of power. Use it." Monday morning arrived with a surreal quality, like watching a dream unfold in real time. I woke at 3 a.m., showered and dressed in the burgundy blazer I'd chosen specifically for this moment. Bold, confident, impossible to ignore. A car service delivered me to the GNN studios, where a team of makeup artists and producers bustled around me in a choreographed dance of preparation. At 5:55 a.m., I took my seat at the anchor desk. The studio was vast, a semicircle of screens and cameras, lights so bright they obliterated the world beyond their reach. Bradley sat to my left, already positioned and composed, offering me a nod that could have meant anything. 2 minutes to air, the floor director announced. I looked into the camera, the one that would carry my image across oceans, into living rooms and bedrooms and coffee shops on 6 continents. I thought about my mother, watching from Umuahia. I thought about my father, watching from somewhere beyond. I thought about the girl who'd used an empty tin can as a microphone, dreaming of exactly this moment. 1 minute. I took a deep breath and felt something settle in my chest. Not calm exactly, but certainty. I had earned this seat. I belonged in it, and no amount of skepticism or hostility could change that fundamental truth. 30 seconds. The floor director counted down with his fingers. 10, 9, 8. The theme music swelled. The red light on the camera turned on, and I opened my mouth. Good morning, I'm Adiz Okonkwo, and this is Global Sunrise. The first broadcast went flawlessly. I don't say that with false modesty. I'm genuinely surprised by how smoothly everything unfolded. The transitions were crisp, the interviews were engaging, and my delivery was exactly what I'd practiced. Clear, confident, authentically me. But the real test wasn't the broadcast itself. It was what came after. Within hours, social media exploded with reactions. Some were exactly what the critics had predicted. Complaints about my accent, demands for subtitles, racist vitriol that I'd learned to expect but never quite grew numb to. But alongside the negativity, something unexpected emerged. Thousands of messages from viewers who'd never seen themselves reflected in a global news anchor before. African immigrants who wept seeing someone who sounded like home. Second-generation children who finally had someone to point to when asked what they wanted to be when they grew up. Viewers from around the world who said my voice made them feel like the news was finally speaking to them, not just at them. You sound like my grandmother, one message read. For the first time, I actually want to watch the news. I'm Nigerian American, and I've spent my whole life being told to fix my parents' accent when I speak. Watching you this morning made me cry. Thank you for being unapologetically yourself. My daughter asked why the news lady talks differently. I told her it's because the world is full of beautiful different voices. She said she wants to be a news lady too. I saved every single one of those messages in a folder on my desktop labeled, Why It Matters. The ratings from that first week exceeded everyone's projections. Not just because of the novelty factor, though that certainly played a role, but because, as Rachel had predicted, audiences were hungry for something different. They were tired of the same polished sameness that had defined broadcast news for decades. They wanted authenticity, diversity, perspectives that reflected the actual world they lived in. You're connecting with demographics we've never reached before, Rachel told me during our weekly debrief. Young viewers, immigrant communities, international audiences who previously dismissed us as too American-centric. Your presence is changing how people see this network. And the complaints, the people who say they can't understand me. Vocal minority, the numbers tell a different story. Our research shows that after a few broadcasts, even skeptical viewers adapt. They stop hearing your accent as foreign and start hearing it as trusted. She smiled. You're retraining their ears, Adiz. You're expanding their definition of what authority sounds like. Not everyone at GNN shared Rachel's enthusiasm. Bradley Ashworth remained cordial but distant, his body language during broadcasts suggesting barely concealed frustration whenever I took the lead on major stories. Other veteran staffers grumbled about lowered standards and political correctness in conversations they thought I couldn't hear. I heard, I just chose not to respond. My energy was better spent on the work itself than on winning over people who'd already decided I didn't belong. The real turning point came 3 months into my tenure. A major earthquake struck central Turkey, killing thousands and displacing millions more. It was the kind of breaking news event that tested a newsroom's capabilities and its anchor's composure. I was on air when the first reports came in, interrupting our planned programming to bring viewers live updates as the scope of the disaster became clear. For the next 14 hours, I anchored continuous coverage, coordinating with correspondents on the ground, interviewing rescue officials and humanitarian experts, providing context about Turkey's geological vulnerabilities and the international response effort. It was exhausting. It was also exhilarating. This was journalism at its most essential, bearing witness to tragedy, connecting audiences to events that mattered, using every skill I'd developed over 15 years to inform and illuminate. When I finally handed off to the evening team, I was running on fumes. But Rachel found me in the hallway outside the studio, her expression radiating something I hadn't seen before. Adiz, that was extraordinary. The way you held that coverage together, your composure, your command, your ability to synthesize information in real time. She shook her head. You just showed the entire industry what you're capable of. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing your job at the highest possible level, and the audience noticed. We had record viewership throughout the afternoon. People were specifically tuning in because they wanted to hear how you covered it. The reviews that followed were unlike anything I'd experienced. Industry publications praised my authoritative presence and commanding delivery. Viewers flooded social media with appreciation for coverage that was human without being sensational. Even some of my harshest critics acknowledged that I'd proven myself on the biggest possible stage. And Bradley Ashworth, who'd watched the entire 14 hours from the green room, notably not offering to relieve me, said nothing at all. Which, in its own way, said everything. The accolades accumulated over the following year. I was nominated for multiple journalism awards, winning several including the prestigious International Journalism Award for Excellence in Breaking News Coverage. I was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and industry events about diversity in media, about authentic storytelling, about the power of voices that had been marginalized. But the recognition that meant the most came from unexpected places. A letter from a young woman in Kenya who'd been told by her broadcast school that her Kikuyu accent would prevent her from ever anchoring news. She'd watched me on Global Sunrise and decided to pursue her dreams anyway. Now she was working at a local station in Nairobi, inspired by my example. An email from a mother in London whose daughter, born to Nigerian immigrants, had announced she wanted to be a journalist. "Because of you," the mother wrote, "she believes she can." A video message from a group of journalism students at the University of Lagos, my alma mater, dedicating their graduation to my success. "You showed us that our voices matter," they said in chorus. "You showed us that we don't have to become someone else to succeed." These were the metrics that mattered. Not ratings or awards, but lives changed. Doors opened. Possibilities expanded. The girl who'd been laughed at for her accent was now opening doors for others. 5 years into my tenure at Global Sunrise, I received an invitation that brought my journey full circle. The Chicago affiliate where I'd completed my fellowship, the same newsroom where Sandra Mitchell had told me my accent was too African for American television, was celebrating its 75th anniversary. They were hosting a gala honoring distinguished alumni of their journalism programs. And they wanted me to deliver the keynote address. I stared at the invitation for a long time, memories flooding back. The cramped office where Sandra had suggested I work with a speech coach. The polite rejections after the fellowship ended. The drive to O'Hare Airport, leaving Chicago convinced I would never succeed in American media. My first instinct was to decline. Why celebrate an institution that had rejected me? Why give them the satisfaction of associating themselves with my success after contributing nothing to it? But Michael saw it differently. "This is your chance to rewrite the narrative," he said. "To stand on their stage and show everyone who you've become, to make them reckon with what they missed and what they need to change." It feels petty, like I'm going back just to rub their faces in it. It's not petty if you use the platform to help others. Think about the young journalists who'll be in that room, the ones who look like you, who sound like you, who are being told right now that they need to change. What would it mean for them to hear your story? He was right. Of course he was right. This wasn't about me and Sandra Mitchell. It was about every journalist of color who would pass through those halls in the years to come. I accepted the invitation. The gala was held at a downtown hotel, the same venue where the fellowship graduation had taken place 15 years earlier. I arrived in a gown of emerald green, a color that reminded me of the Nigerian flag, of home, of everything I carried with me. The ballroom was filled with Chicago media luminaries, corporate sponsors, and current journalism fellows who watched me with wide eyes as I was escorted to the head table. I recognized a few faces from my fellowship year, colleagues who'd gone on to comfortable careers at local stations while I'd been pushed out. And there, seated near the front with the other senior executives, was Sandra Mitchell. She looked older, grayer, but still wore that polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. Our gazes met briefly. She nodded with a politician's practiced warmth. I nodded back and felt nothing but peace. When it was time for my address, I walked to the podium, looking out at an audience that included some who had believed in me, some who had dismissed me, and many who hadn't known me at all. "Thank you for this honor," I began. "Standing here tonight feels surreal because 15 years ago, I sat in this very hotel at the fellowship graduation, certain that my broadcasting career was over before it had truly begun." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I'd been told, during my year here, that my accent was a problem, that American audiences would find me difficult to understand, that if I wanted to succeed in this industry, I needed to become someone else, to erase the voice that my parents gave me, that my homeland shaped, that carried the prayers of my grandmother and the dreams of my ancestors. The room was absolutely silent now. I tried. I worked with speech coaches. I practiced flattening my vowels, neutralizing my cadence, becoming what they told me I needed to be. And at the end of that year, I wasn't offered a position. I left Chicago believing I had failed. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But I hadn't failed. I'd simply been looking for opportunity in a place that wasn't ready to see my value. And when I stopped waiting for permission, when I stopped trying to fit into boxes that were never built for me, I discovered something remarkable. I looked directly at the young fellows in the audience, their faces eager and uncertain. The world is bigger than any one newsroom, any one network, any one country. And there are audiences everywhere hungry for authentic voices, voices that sound like their families, their communities, their experiences. You don't have to erase yourself to succeed. Sometimes, you just have to find the people who see your difference as a strength. I clicked to a slide showing my career trajectory, from Lagos Radio to Al Jazeera to Global Sunrise, from local correspondent to international anchor, from rejection to recognition. Today, I anchor a program that reaches over 100 million viewers across 6 continents. I speak to that audience in the same voice that was once deemed too African for American television. And every morning, I receive messages from people who say they finally feel seen, immigrants who hear their heritage in my cadence, young people of color who now believe journalism is possible for them. I turn back to the audience, finding Sandra's face in the crowd. I'm not here tonight to settle scores. I'm not here to embarrass anyone or relitigate old decisions. I'm here because the young journalists in this room need to know that rejection isn't destiny, that the people who underestimate you don't get to write your ending, that your voice, your authentic, unmodified, unapologetically you voice, is enough. I leaned into the microphone. To the fellows, they may tell you to change. They may tell you that certain accents, certain looks, certain backgrounds are barriers to success. They may offer speech coaches and image consultants and helpful advice about becoming more marketable. I shook my head slowly. Be careful, because sometimes the thing they want you to erase is the very thing that will make you extraordinary. The applause began before I finished, a wave of sound that built and built until almost everyone in the room was on their feet. I saw tears on the faces of the young fellows. I saw standing ovations from allies I'd never met. I saw Sandra Mitchell clapping politely, her expression unreadable. And I saw something else. A young black woman in the second row, wearing a fellowship badge, sobbing openly as she applauded. After the address, she found me in the crowd. "Ms. Okonkwo, I'm Amara. I'm from Cameroon. They've been telling me my accent is too strong, that I need to work on my delivery." She was trembling. I was starting to believe them, but your speech, your story, I'm not going to change, not anymore. I took her hands in mine, feeling the resonance of a moment that connected my past to her future. "Your accent is your superpower, Amara. It tells people where you come from, what you've survived, what perspectives you carry. Don't let anyone take that away from you." She nodded, tears still streaming, and I knew that my return to Chicago had been worth it, not for vindication, but for this, for Amara, for every young journalist who would hear my story and choose authenticity over assimilation. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Sandra Mitchell approached me near the exit. "Adiz," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "That was a powerful speech." "Thank you. I want you to know," she hesitated, something flickering behind her careful composure. "Things were different then. The industry was different. We made decisions based on what we believed audiences wanted." "I understand." "Do you?" She searched my face, looking for something, absolution, perhaps, or understanding. "I've watched your career, I've seen what you've accomplished, and I've wondered sometimes if we made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake, Sandra. You made a choice. The same choice the industry made for decades, to value comfort over capability, familiarity over excellence." I paused. "I'm not angry anymore. I outgrew anger years ago, but I'm also not going to pretend that what happened was okay. It wasn't, and the young journalists in that room deserve to know it wasn't." Sandra nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Not quite remorse, but perhaps recognition. "Fair enough," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you proved us wrong." "So am I." I walked out of that hotel into the Chicago night, feeling the cold air against my face, remembering the young woman who'd stood on this same sidewalk 15 years ago, heartbroken and lost. She wasn't lost anymore. She'd found her way, not despite her voice, but because of it. 10 years have passed since I first sat behind the Global Sunrise anchor desk. I'm writing this from my office in New York, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, walls covered with awards and photographs and mementos from a career that has exceeded every dream I ever dared to dream in that small house in Umuahia. Global Sunrise is now the most-watched morning news program in the world. Not just because of me, because of the team Rachel Torres built, the vision she championed, the commitment to authentic voices that transformed how the industry thinks about diversity. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't proud of my role in that transformation. The girl who was told she was too African for American television has now interviewed presidents and prime ministers, Nobel laureates and grassroots activists, celebrities and ordinary people whose extraordinary stories deserve to be told. I've reported from war zones and refugee camps, from climate summits and coronations, from moments of tragedy and triumph that will define this generation's understanding of the world. And through it all, I've spoken in my own voice. The same Igbo-inflected, Nigerian-shaped, unapologetically authentic voice that Sandra Mitchell once told me to erase. My mother passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family who'd gathered from across the globe to be with her in her final days. At her funeral, the church in Umuahia was filled to overflowing, not just with family and friends, but with community members who remembered the woman who sold fabric in the market, who raised 6 children with fierce love, who never stopped believing that her daughter would talk her way around the world. I gave the eulogy in Igbo and English, switching between languages as naturally as breathing, the way we'd always spoken at home. And when I described my mother's role in my journey, how she told me never to cut out my own tongue to make others comfortable, I saw heads nodding throughout the church. They understood. They'd carried the same wisdom across generations. She never got to see the inside of a television studio, I said. She never walked the halls of GNN or Al Jazeera. But everything I am, everything I've accomplished, started with her voice in my ear, telling me I was enough, telling me my accent was a gift, not a curse, telling me to speak truth and tell stories and lift up those who cannot lift themselves. I keep a photograph of her on my desk now, right next to the one of my father. Every morning, before I go on air, I look at their faces and remember why I do this work. Not for the fame or the recognition, but for the ones who came before and the ones who will come after. The Adiz Okonkwo Foundation for Diverse Voices launched 3 years ago, funded by my earnings and supported by donors who believe in our mission. We provide scholarships for journalism students from underrepresented backgrounds, mentorship programs that connect young broadcasters with industry veterans, and advocacy work aimed at changing hearing practices throughout the media industry. Patricia Washington serves on our board, my mentor, my champion, the woman who saw my potential when the mainstream industry couldn't. She's in her 70s now, still fierce, still fighting, still convinced that the revolution she started decades ago is finally bearing fruit. "You exceeded every expectation I had for you," she told me at our last board meeting. "And I had very high expectations. I learned from the best." "You learned from yourself," she corrected. "I just helped you see what was already there." Amara, the young Cameroonian fellow I met at the Chicago Gala, is now a correspondent for the BBC, based in Nairobi, covering East African affairs with the same passion and authenticity that I recognized in her that night. She sends me messages sometimes, updates on her career, gratitude for the encouragement I offered when she needed it most. "You changed my life," she wrote recently, "not just by inspiring me, but by proving that it was possible. Every time I face discrimination, every time someone questions my accent, I think about you, and I keep going." There are hundreds of Amaras now, young journalists I've mentored, encouraged, championed. Some work at major networks. Others run independent media outlets. A few have returned to their home countries to build journalism infrastructure where none existed before. They are my legacy, more than any award or accolade could ever be. Last month, I received an unexpected package. It was from the University of Lagos, my alma mater, where a new building had been constructed to house the School of Mass Communication. They were naming it the Adiz Okonkwo Center for Broadcast Excellence. I flew to Lagos for the dedication ceremony. Walking through halls filled with students who looked at me with the same hope and hunger I'd carried at their age. The building was beautiful, state-of-the-art studios, modern equipment, spaces designed to nurture the next generation of African journalists. "This is your legacy," the Vice Chancellor said during the ceremony. "Not just your career, but the doors you've opened for those who will follow." I stood at the podium, looking out at students who'd traveled from across Nigeria and beyond, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From a tin can microphone in Umuahia to the anchor desk of the world's most watched news program. From rejection in Chicago to recognition on every continent. "They laughed at my accent," I said simply. "They told me I was too African, too foreign, too different to succeed. They offered to help me become someone else, someone more palatable, more comfortable, more familiar." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I refused, not because I was brave, I was terrified, but because somewhere deep inside, I knew that erasing my voice would mean erasing myself, and I wasn't willing to pay that price. I looked at the young faces before me, the next generation of storytellers, truth-tellers, voice carriers. "Your accent is not a liability. Your difference is not a weakness. The very thing that makes you stand out is the thing that will make you unforgettable. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The applause that followed echoed off the walls of the building that bore my name, a building that would shape voices for generations to come. As I sit here now, in an office I never imagined I'd occupy, doing work I never dared to dream I'd do, I sometimes think about the girl who practiced flattening her vowels in front of a dormitory mirror. She was so desperate to belong, So willing to cut away pieces of herself to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her. So convinced that the only path to success was through erasure. I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now. That her accent wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. A bridge connecting her to millions of people who'd never heard themselves reflected in global media. A bridge between her ancestors and her descendants. A bridge between where she came from and where she was going. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been told your accent is wrong, your voice is too different, your identity is a problem to be solved, I need you to hear me. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. Your voice carries the prayers of your grandmother and the dreams of your children. It carries history and hope and a perspective the world desperately needs to hear. Don't you dare silence it to make someone else comfortable. The world is changing. The audiences are changing. The very industry that rejected me is now scrambling to find voices like yours, authentic, diverse, unapologetically different. Your moment is coming. And when it arrives, I want you to speak in your true voice, the one your mother gave you, the one your homeland shaped, the one that makes you irreplaceable. So I ask you now, what voice have you been hiding? What accent have you been suppressing? What parts of yourself have you been erasing to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, because your story matters, not just to you, but to everyone who needs to know they're not alone. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who's been told they need to change their voice to succeed. Because they don't, they never did. Until next time, this is Auntie Me reminding you. They can laugh at your accent. They can question your belonging. They can try to silence everything that makes you unique. But they can never, ever take your voice unless you give it to them. Stay authentic, stay loud, and never stop speaking your truth. The end.